Welcome to True Crime Sketches, where we venture deep into the shadowy corridors of some of the most chilling and labyrinthine criminal cases. Today's tale transports us to the sun-drenched state of Florida, more specifically to the sweltering month of September in 2003, when a shocking murder sent waves of horror and disbelief throughout a seemingly peaceful community. This is the story of Emily Kenyon, a loving wife, a trusted friend, and a woman known for her unassuming kindness. But behind the tranquil veneer of suburban life lay secrets darker than anyone could imagine. Emily's world was about to come crashing down in the most tragic of ways after unearthing the double life of the man she thought she knew best, her own husband. Emily was a 37-year-old with a passion for the odd and the extraordinary. Residing in the lush suburban town of West Palm Beach, Florida, she had built a life around her love for reptiles, particularly snakes. Curating at a local reptile house, Emily spent her days handling creatures most people would shy away from, pythons, boas, and even a rare green mamba among them. But her garden was her sanctuary, a colorful retreat where she nurtured plants with the same care she gave to her serpentine companions. Her love story, however, was as intriguing as her choice of pets. Emily met Marlon Kenyon at the University of South Florida, where she pursued biology. After graduation, they married and moved into a cozy house with a sprawling backyard, perfect for her botanical and reptilian pursuits. Life seemed picture-perfect, from her thriving garden to her thriving marriage, or so it appeared on the surface. Beneath this picture-perfect life, Emily had no idea that Marlon harbored dark secrets that would soon shatter everything. Her world came crashing down one fateful September day in 2003, when Emily made a discovery so staggering it would set off a chain of events no one could have foreseen. Marlon was living a double life. Not only was he Emily's husband, but unbeknownst to her, he was also secretly married to another woman, Zara Pinnock. The worst part? Zara was no stranger to Emily. In fact, Zara was her gynecologist, a figure Emily had trusted for years. The discovery hit Emily like a freight train, sending her reeling. It was more than betrayal. It was a cruel twist of fate that turned her life into a surreal nightmare. Emily confided in her coworker and friend, Robert Banjovac, who shared her affinity for reptiles. Robert, sensing the danger that loomed, urged her to tread carefully. But Emily, determined and desperate for answers, decided to confront Marlon about his lies. She had no idea this confrontation would set the stage for something far more sinister. Amid the storm of deception and betrayal, Emily discovered she was pregnant. A fragile glimmer of hope emerged amidst the turmoil. She planned to visit her brother Brian in Orlando to confide in him and seek his advice. But fate was not so kind. Emily would never get the chance to share her plans. On a somber morning, September 10, 2003, dark clouds lingered over West Palm Beach, as if foreshadowing the horror that was about to unfold. At around 7:30 a.m., Linda Ross, Emily's neighbor, set out on her usual routine of walking her dog. Linda often glimpsed Emily in the garden at that hour, tending to her beloved plants. But today, something was off. An eerie silence had descended over the yard. As Linda approached the fence, a sight too dreadful for words greeted her. Emily lay motionless on the ground, a crimson pool of blood surrounding her. Panic surged through Linda's veins as she rushed to her friend's side. Nearby, a golf club, blood-streaked and menacing, lay discarded, the weapon of unimaginable violence. The scene was a grotesque juxtaposition to the serenity of Emily's garden. Linda's shaking hands dialed 911, her voice trembling as she begged for help. When paramedics arrived, their grim duty confirmed Linda's worst fears. Emily was gone. The once thriving woman who had filled her days with life and color was now a victim of an incomprehensible brutality. The police descended on the scene quickly, the air thick with the buzz of urgency and disbelief. Detectives James Avery and Avery Brooks were tasked with untangling the threads of this horrific crime. The garden, once a place of beauty, had transformed into a blood-soaked crime scene. Evidence littered the yard: broken flower pots, scattered gardening tools, and the bloodied golf club that spoke of a vicious struggle. Emily had fought. She had fought hard, but the blows she endured were too much, her body bearing the cruel signature of rage unleashed. The detectives worked tirelessly, scouring every inch of the scene for clues. Forensic experts meticulously collected evidence, hoping to catch even the slightest thread that might lead them to her killer. As the investigation deepened, the question on everyone's lips remained the same: who could have done this, and why? The story of Emily Kenyon is one of love turned to lies, of a life brimming with promise only to be snuffed out by secrets too dark to bear. As her family and community mourned, the hunt for her killer began. But even as the truth started to emerge, The darkness of that September morning would never be forgotten. This content may violate our usage policies. Did we get it wrong? Please tell us by giving this response a thumbs down. The neighbor who discovered Emily's lifeless body, Linda Ross, was still trembling in shock, but managed to give a clear and concise recount of what had unfolded that tragic morning. Her voice quivered as she relayed how she had found Emily face down, her garden now tainted with blood. Her call to 911 had been immediate, panic-stricken but decisive. Linda's testimony, vivid and consistent, provided the detectives with a vital piece of the timeline puzzle, though they knew it was just the beginning of a more harrowing investigation. Detectives James Avery and Avery Brooks wasted no time canvassing the neighborhood. They knocked on doors, questioned every neighbor within earshot, hoping to pull threads from the morning's chaos. Several residents recalled hearing raised voices and arguments, sharp and fierce, late the previous night. But when it came to seeing anything out of place, the neighbors were at a loss. The Kenyon property had remained eerily quiet throughout the night, like the calm before an inevitable storm. Inside the Kenyon home, the detectives scoured for clues. There were no signs of forced entry, no windows shattered, no locks broken. This immediately raised a chilling possibility. Emily had likely known her attacker. Her purse, phone, and personal belongings were still in the house, untouched, ruling out any possibility of robbery as a motive. It wasn't a random act of violence. This was deeply personal. The detectives' focus narrowed to Emily's closest circle, starting with the man who, by all appearances, had the most to lose, her husband, Marlon Kenyon. Marlon, at 35, appeared to be living the dream. Successful, charming, a well-regarded financial advisor with a life built on good looks and good fortune. But as the detectives soon uncovered, Marlon's polished exterior hid a sinister secret, a life steeped in deception. Marlon was living not one, but two lives. Emily was his first wife, but in the shadows of Miami, he had another spouse, Zara Pinnock, a woman Emily knew only too well as her own gynecologist. The revelation of Marlon's bigamy had thrown Emily into a whirlwind of emotional turmoil in the days leading up to her murder. And yet, as if that weren't shocking enough, there was more. A secret career Marlon had hidden from both women. Under the name Ash Ketchum Krabs, Marlon was secretly starring in gay adult films. The weight of his duplicity was staggering, and the detectives were now zeroing in on Marlon as their prime suspect. On the day of Emily's murder, Marlon was brought in for questioning. He appeared unnervingly calm, his demeanor betraying little emotion as he faced the detectives in a sterile, sunlit room at the West Palm Beach Police Department. He met their gazes, seemingly unruffled, but Detectives Avery and Brooks could sense something simmering beneath his collected surface. Marlon, without a flicker of hesitation, responded, "I was in Miami on business, stayed at a hotel." The detectives pressed on. "She found out recently," Marlon admitted. "It's been tough, but I loved her." On the surface, Marlon's alibi checked out. He had indeed been registered at the Hilton Miami downtown. But the timing left gaps, enough room for him to have driven back to West Palm Beach in the dead of night, committed the crime, and then returned to Miami before anyone could suspect. Despite Marlon's smooth answers, his double life provided a compelling motive. Emily's discovery threatened everything: his marriage, his career, his very identity. The detectives sensed something off about his demeanor, too calm, too rehearsed. Still, without concrete evidence to hold him, Marlon was released, though he remained under careful surveillance. While Marlon remained the primary suspect, the investigation's next turn led the detectives to Zara Pinnock, Marlon's other wife. Zara, a dedicated gynecologist in Miami, was blindsided by the news of both Emily's murder and Marlon's treachery. When detectives Avery and Brooks arrived at her clinic, they found a woman not complicit in Marlon's schemes, but rather another victim. Zara's eyes, pale and wide with shock, betrayed the agony of betrayal as she welcomed the detectives into her office. Zara had been unaware of Marlon's other life. She had no idea that, while she was building a life with him in Miami, he was living an entirely different one with Emily in West Palm Beach. Her anguish was palpable, yet she remained composed, offering the detectives every scrap of information she could recall about Marlon's recent behavior. Zara recounted how she had last seen him on the night of September 9th. He had kissed her goodbye, mentioning a business trip to Miami. There had been no reason for her to doubt him, until now. "Did you ever imagine he could be capable of something like this?" Detective Brooks asked gently. Zara shook her head, eyes brimming with tears. "No, never. He was always so caring, so attentive." With Zara's alibi solid, she had been at work the night of the murder. The detectives shifted their focus back to Marlon. Zara, in her shock and grief, had provided valuable insight into his character. Marlon was far more dangerous than anyone had realized, and his cold duplicity painted him as a man who would go to any lengths to protect his secrets. As September marched forward, so did the investigation. On the morning of September 15, 2003, a new lead surfaced, one that threatened to blow the case wide open. The sun was just beginning to pierce through the haze of recent days, casting a golden glow over the neighborhood. At around 9 a.m., detectives Avery and Brooks received a call that would change everything. This time the winds of justice were beginning to shift. Detective James Avery's phone buzzed unexpectedly that morning. A call from Henry Guanabo, the owner of a small pawn shop nestled on CLA Street in West Palm Beach. Henry's voice crackled with urgency as he explained that a gold bracelet engraved with Emily Kenyon's initials had surfaced in his shop. Detectives Avery and Brooks, sensing the gravity of the find, sped to Turner's pawn shop, their thoughts racing ahead of them. The shop was cramped and cluttered, a haphazard mix of old guitars, vintage jewelry, and forgotten relics. Henry, a burly man with a cautious expression, handed over the bracelet, a delicate, unmistakable piece Emily often wore. As Avery turned it over in his hands, there was no doubt. This was Emily's. Henry provided a description of the man who had tried to pawn the bracelet just 2 days earlier, and the detectives' hearts quickened when the sketch began to take shape. It was none other than Robert Banavac, Emily's co-worker and close friend. Avery and Brooks exchanged a glance. They were closing in. The bracelet was quickly sent to forensics for further analysis. Fingerprints confirmed what the detectives feared. Robert's prints were all over it. The evidence was mounting against him, and it was time to act. As they delved deeper, surveillance footage from nearby shops added another damning piece to the puzzle. Robert himself, clad in a baseball cap and sunglasses, was seen entering the pawn shop. The detectives felt the net tightening around him. The next morning, under the relentless Florida sun, detectives Avery and Brooks knocked on Robert Banavac's door. His house, a modest single-story home with snake terrariums lining the walls, was a reflection of the man, eccentric, isolated, and filled with a haunting stillness. Robert greeted them nervously, his thin frame twitching as he led the detectives into his living room. His eyes darted toward the snakes slithering behind glass, as though they could offer him solace. For years, Robert had harbored an unrequited love for Emily, his obsession festering in the shadow of her marriage to Marlon. His passion for reptiles mirrored his passion for Emily, intense, uncontrollable, and at times dangerous. The detectives prodded him gently at first, asking about his relationship with Emily and how much he knew about the unraveling of her marriage. Robert's eyes darkened when Marlon's name was mentioned. He heard her, Robert spat, his agitation bubbling to the surface. Emily told me about it, about his other wife. Did you visit her the day after the murder? Brooks asked, watching Robert closely. Yes, Robert admitted, his voice strained, to check on her snakes. She loved them so much. But Robert's weak alibi and volatile emotions only deepened the detective's suspicions. His visit to Emily's garden after her death, coupled with neighbors spotting his car late on the night of the murder, painted a troubling picture. His unstable mental health, his history of depression and anger, made him a suspect in their eyes, but they needed more. Concrete proof that he was capable of carrying out such a heinous act. As days passed, the detectives kept Robert under close surveillance, while they pieced together the final fragments of the case. Their breakthrough came in the form of an unexpected source, grainy footage from a neighbor's security camera, installed to protect a quiet garden, but now a crucial witness to murder. The camera, angled toward Emily's backyard, captured a series of haunting images. On the night of the murder, Marlon Kenyon was seen entering the yard, a golf club gripped tightly in his hand. Moments later he emerged, his clothes smeared with blood. It was the evidence the detectives had been waiting for. The footage was irrefutable. Marlon had been there that night, the murder weapon in hand. The detectives wasted no time. Under the looming clouds of a humid September afternoon, they arrived at Marlon's office. Inside, Marlon sat confidently behind his desk, discussing financial plans with his clients, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering outside. But as the detective stepped into his office, the calm shattered. Marlon's face twisted in shock, his composure breaking as they announced his arrest. Anger boiled over as he ripped off his clothes in a fit of rage, declaring his innocence with a desperation that only made his guilt more palpable. His colleagues looked on in stunned silence as the detectives handcuffed him and read him his rights. The man who had so meticulously crafted a facade of control had finally crumbled. Marlon was taken to the West Palm Beach Police Department, where the evidence weighed heavily against him. His denials grew weaker with each passing hour as the detectives laid out their case. The fingerprints, the stolen bracelet, and now the security footage showing him at the scene of the crime. As the interrogation wore on, it became clear that Marlon's carefully constructed world had been torn apart. The secrets, the lies, the double life. Everything had spiraled out of control, and in a moment of desperation, he had murdered the woman who had once trusted him with her heart. With Marlon behind bars, the detectives felt the weight of justice settle into place. Emily Kenyon's murder had been solved, but the tragedy of her life cut short would forever leave a scar on the community. For Detective James Avery and Detective Avery Brooks, it was a case that reminded them of the fragility of trust and the darkness that sometimes lies beneath even the most polished of surfaces. A damning picture of Marlon's guilt had emerged as the trial loomed closer. The community, still reeling from the revelations, found it hard to reconcile the charming man they had once known with the monster now accused of such a brutal crime. Emily Kenyon had been a beloved figure, her kindness rippling through the lives of so many. Her murder left a gaping void, one that seemed impossible to fill. The shockwaves from Marlon Kenyon's arrest only deepened the sense of betrayal. A man once trusted, now revealed as a calculating killer. On December 1, 2004, Marlon's trial began under the glaring lights of media scrutiny. Reporters from every local news station in West Palm Beach filled the courthouse, their cameras flashing as friends, family, and curious onlookers poured into the courtroom, eager to witness justice unfold. The room was tense, packed with the raw emotions of Emily's grieving loved ones and the cold gaze of those hoping to see Marlon brought down. Carla Matthews, a tenacious 45-year-old prosecutor with a reputation for her unwavering pursuit of justice, led the case against Marlon. Her opening statements were as sharp as the evidence she laid bare before the jury. Matthews didn't hold back, starting with the security camera footage showing Marlon entering the backyard with a golf club in hand, the very weapon used to bludgeon his wife to death. The stained clothes and the pawned bracelet with Emily's initials further wove together the narrative that Marlon, driven by desperation and fear of exposure, had silenced the woman who had threatened to upend his carefully crafted facade. But Marlon had a formidable defense in Mike Train, a veteran attorney with a silver tongue, known for taking on the toughest cases. Train painted Marlon as a loving husband, caught in a web of circumstantial evidence. He argued that Marlon's double life, while regrettable, didn't make him a killer. Train introduced the theory that Robert Banavac, a man tormented by his unrequited love for Emily, could have committed the crime in a jealous rage. The defense fought hard, casting doubt where they could. But the prosecution's case was solid, a fortress built on irrefutable facts. Emily's family sat in the front row, their grief laid bare for all to see. Her parents held each other close, their hands clasped together as if drawing strength from one another. Tears were wiped away silently, the pain too deep for words. Their daughter's life had been stolen from them, and now they waited, hoping the justice system would not fail her. Over the next few weeks, witnesses took the stand. Friends and co-workers spoke of Emily's bright spirit, her love for life, and her devastation upon discovering Marlon's deception. The prosecution's narrative was clear. Marlon Kenyon, fearing the collapse of his dual lives and the exposure of his secret career, had resorted to murder to keep everything from unraveling. Finally, on December 15, 2004, after weeks of grueling testimony and 3 days of jury deliberation, the verdict was ready. The courtroom was so silent that the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The room erupted in a mixture of gasps, whispers, and stifled sobs. Emily's family broke down, tears streaming down their faces as they embraced one another, the weight of justice providing some small measure of solace in the face of their irreparable loss. Marlon's expression, once so composed, was now a mask of disbelief. His confident facade shattered as he was led away in handcuffs, sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no redemption for him, no return to the life he had so desperately tried to protect. Emily's brother stood before the court during the sentencing, his voice steady but filled with sorrow. He spoke of Marlon's deep betrayal and the unimaginable pain it had caused his family. His words were a testament to the depth of the wound Marlon had inflicted, not just on one person but on an entire community. As Marlon was escorted out, his head hung low. The man once known for his charm and charisma was now a hollow shell. His life sentence brought a semblance of closure, but it could never undo the damage. In the months following the trial, the community began to heal, though the scars of Emily's death would never fully fade. Her family, though forever changed, found solace in creating a scholarship fund in her name at the University of South Florida, ensuring that Emily's passion for reptiles and education would live on. Zara Pinnock, Marlon's second wife, struggled with the weight of her own betrayal and grief, eventually leaving West Palm Beach for the quiet refuge of her hometown in Trenton, New Jersey. Robert Banavac, once a suspect himself, carried the heavy burden of Emily's loss. Struggling with guilt and sorrow, he sought therapy to help him cope with the emotional toll. Yet through his grief, Robert found a way to honor Emily's memory by continuing to care for her beloved snakes. Each slither, each hiss, was a living reminder of the vibrant woman he had admired. Meanwhile, Marlon Kenyon spent his days behind bars, his once glamorous life reduced to the monotony of prison routines. His story, a tale of lies, betrayal, and murder, became a cautionary tale within the prison walls. Inmates and guards alike spoke of the man who had it all, and threw it away in a desperate bid to keep his secrets buried. Emily Kenyon's tragic death left an indelible mark on all who knew her. Though justice had been served, the loss continued to reverberate through the lives of those left behind. The community, shaken but resilient, came together to remember her for the light she brought into the world, even as they were reminded of the fragility of trust and the devastating consequences of betrayal. Thank you for joining us on this episode of True Crime Sketches. Until next time, stay vigilant and stay safe. If you found this story compelling, please like and subscribe to our channel. And if you have any thoughts or personal experiences with similar cases, leave us a comment below. Stay safe, true crime case solvers.